I'm going to come on to Fletchor Tembo now, research fellow at ODI, and just because I didn't say this, a big thank you to ODI for suggesting this whole session and for hosting us here. And we've asked Fletchor to kind of reflect on some of this discussion, and then I think we'll open it up.
Yeah, good. Thanks, James. Of course, it's quite a tough job to kind of tease out very, very informative comments that the presenters have made. But maybe let me start that I manage with the fact that I manage a program called Mwananchi, which is a Swahili word standing for Ordinary Citizen. It's a DFID-funded program under the Governance and Transparency Fund, which works in 7 African countries, deliberately chosen for their contextual differences. So just using rough governance indicators, we have Ghana on one hand, maybe in the top 10 of the Mo Ibrahim Index, for instance. And then we have Southern Sudan on the other side, which are having a referendum coming up. And they're not sure whether they form an independent state or not. And then you see Sierra Leone, and with Ethiopia, we have Uganda, Malawi, and Zambia. So in between, a number of hybrid states. And the theory of change, or the approach to what we're doing, is looking at how citizen demand for good governance could be achieved through the work of interlocutors. This word interlocutor, implying those actors that tend to work in between the citizen and the state. And in there, we find the media, we find civil society, we find members of parliament, local councillors, traditional leaders, and how these orchestrate the relationship or try to get the deal between the state and the citizens. And I find this discussion quite alive for what we're looking at, and although in our case media is one of the components. Maybe starting with Elizabeth, I come from Malawi, and in this program I live in Malawi. I deliberately chose to say, let me go and be in one of those 7, and in the morning buy a paper, listen to the radio, and kind of see what is the dynamism around, what is happening around between citizens and the state. And so my comments are very much informed from that background as well. And the first point I want to make is the idea of the public sphere, which was actually brought up by Elizabeth. The fact that we could, for instance, look to media and think that through media we might find a very more a space where issues are discussed in a more informative and truthful information is found there, and media is able to provide that. And I think I want to kind of challenge that from our own analysis, because partly of what the Kenya story shows, and if you look at Kenya in the history of democracy, Kenya is one of the countries that so many countries look up to and think, when those things happened in Kenya, a number of countries, including mine, began to think that maybe there's some things amongst us that we can't see, that somehow one day when something happens, they might just blow out. And they began to explore and those. And I think I would say that apart from Ethiopia, who kind of are exploring the federal and approach to handling ethnicity, where you've got the local governance structure and what formed around different ethnic groups, the rest of Africa came from a championing of after colonialism that said we are united, we are one voice. Zambia said one Zambia, one nation, and so the promotion of unity. But then with multi-party democracy, it seems like those things seem to be challenged, and media is part of that, issue, because you don't find media that is just there in a public sphere, orchestrating open debate. But somehow, if you look at each media, already you can tag, this one is from the north, this one from the south, this one from Green Party, this one from Yellow Party. So I think this is something that is a reality that we have to embrace. And see how one would work with that reality in more informed ways. In our own program, we want to see maybe whether media leverages citizen voices around particular issues in a particular way. We are in a kind of an explorative mode to see what is it that media can do in certain situations, where the tension points, what could media do? That's the first point I want to raise. And again, I think that relates to the point of challenge for professionalism. In Africa, people go to media schools. This time they come from school, they are charged and thinking, yeah, I will do this and very well. But the moment they get into the industry, they find they're meeting these media owners, they're meeting these political interests, and they find themselves with brown envelopes. They find themselves. So it's kind of something that grows, and I think that's your issue about the systemic issues that are there. That then, even though they are, I should say, not everyone wants to do what is being said here. There are very good people that want to do a good job and want to really be evidence-based. But I think we need to explore more on the extent to which evidence could be the basis for under which media could really make a difference. What is the thing that twists evidence? And we need more analysis around those issues in each prevailing context. And then, again, I agree with James, out of that contextual analysis, then design support mechanisms that then provide leverage to ordinary citizens and particular media groups to push their agenda. The other thing I want to mention is the media should be seen as an actor among many. I think although we are looking at media here as a subject, but again, the collusion with the business, collusion with political actors, collusion. So there's a lot of actors there. The society agenda, I like that point, that the standards of association are normally set in civil society, in the broad sense anyway, where you think that where the civic values are are promoted, and how media then promotes those values into the debate, into policy is an important issue. And then lastly, I just want to point to kind of pick on an issue about this kind of proliferation of new media, which I think we need to explore a bit more, because I think one thing that is happening is that although we talk about state regulation, again, I can only see maybe in Ethiopia, where when you're wanting to buy a mobile phone, you have to present your passport, and then, a SIM card, you have to present your passport, in which case the state can follow what is happening around that SIM card, even if you lost it. So they would follow you. But in all other countries, you just go on the market and just buy a SIM card. And so there isn't really, it's kind of like something is happening, and how can the regulation manage that? And there's an example in the paper from the crisis state about Peru, where this, someone comes out and uses kind of like, goes behind the state structures and wins the debate and becomes president. And most of those things we might want to be seeing, we might be seeing in these states. And I think that's something that we ought to look at. And the very last point, I think it's important to emphasize in terms of fragile states, because we work in Southern Sudan, for instance, that we ought to look for whatever small functionality of the state that is working in a positive sense, and build and rally around that in a kind of like good enough governance perspective that Gridu and others are talking about, so that we do not create a demand for something that it cannot be delivered. And I think we learned that lesson quite quickly ourselves. The word demand was, what are you talking about? Demand from who? And then you find that isn't. So, but we ought really to dig deeper into what is the functionality, elements of the state that are positive, around which then the media agenda and other actors could be built. Thank you very much.
Fletcher, thank you very much. And just to pick up one thing on that last point before opening it up, and I caricature James's arguments terribly here, but I think that at heart it's about, unless you have a functioning state, not a lot else happens. And just in relation to what you're doing in your program, what you were just saying, just to what extent is media a brake on the emergence of a functioning state in somewhere like Southern Sudan? Or to what extent is it an engine for the emergence of a functioning state in terms of its fundamental role in ensuring accountability and enhancing state performance, if you like? Are you do you have a view on that, or are you sort of somewhere in between, or do you think it's just not as simple as that?
It's not as simple as that. Again, what one notices in South Sudan is some media sources are quite isolated, a bit more vulnerable, some operating from Kenya, from Uganda still, and because that's what happened during the wartime. But a few that are linked to the church, for instance, becoming more effective because the church provides the protection. And so, I think at the moment, it's a very tense situation. And I think most individuals, a few of them can stick their neck out and be able to write. But there is quite a lot of active writing happening about what is happening, I would say. But it's just that you can't really say this is exactly where media is in that context.
Okay. We're trying to compress